The front door slammed behind me and I struggled to control my breathing, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. The house was quiet, but the silence felt heavy, like it was bursting with all the words we hadn't said yet. Scott's car wasn't in the driveway. I knew exactly where he was, not at work like he'd promised this morning, but likely drowning his sorrows at Larry Al's bar. Again. "Damn it, Scott," I muttered, tossing my purse onto the kitchen counter. The answering machine blinked insistently, and I jabbed the button harder than necessary. A robotic voice began to play the message. "Mrs. Noah, this is Virginia from Midwest Insurance. I'm calling to follow up on the claim your husband filed last week regarding his termination." My stomach twisted. Scott had said he quit his job 3 weeks ago, claiming his boss was impossible to work with. I had doubted him then. It was the third job he'd lost in as many years. But I wanted to believe him. I always wanted to believe him. Another message beeped. "Janet, honey, it's your mother-in-law. I hope you're not working late again. Scott could really use your support right now. Call me back, dear." I deleted Diane's message, feeling my blood boil. Of course, she was on his side. In her eyes, Scott could do no wrong, and everything was somehow my fault. The front door creaked open, and I braced myself. Scott stumbled in, the smell of whiskey clinging to him like a second skin. "Hey, babe," he slurred, attempting a smile that fell flat. "You're home early." "Cut the act, Scott," I snapped, feeling my frustration spill over. "I know you got fired. Why did you lie to me?" His face fell, guilt settling into his tired, red-rimmed eyes. I didn't want to disappoint you. Not again." I ran my hand through my hair, feeling the tears threatening to spill. "So, you thought lying was better? How can we trust each other if you can't even be honest about something like this?" Scott collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "I'm sorry, Janet. I really messed up this time." "This time?" I said, my voice rising. "Scott, it's always this time. We can't keep living like this." He mumbled something about a missed deadline and an angry client. The same story, just a different day. I paced the living room, my thoughts racing. "We need to make some changes. I can't be the only one with a reliable income around here. You need to—" The phone rang, cutting me off. Scott leapt for it like a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. "Hello? Oh, hi, Mom," he said, giving me a look that pleaded for a break from the argument. I rolled my eyes and stormed into the kitchen, needing some space. I filled a glass with water, trying to calm myself. Scott's voice drifted from the living room, muffled but clear enough. "Yeah, Janet's here. She found out about the job." There was a pause, and then his tone dropped. "No, I haven't told her that part yet." I froze, gripping the glass tightly. What else was he hiding from me? My heart pounded as I listened. "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea," Scott continued, his voice urgent. "Janet won't. I know you're trying to help, but—" I stormed back into the living room, my anger boiling over. "What, Scott? What genius plan has your mother come up with now?" Scott's eyes widened in panic. It's nothing. "Mom, I have to go," he said quickly, hanging up before looking at me. "Janet, it's just—" "Just what?" I demanded, my voice sharp. "What aren't you telling me?" He fidgeted with the phone cord, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Mom thought it might be a good idea if she came to stay with us for a while. You know, to help out." The glass slipped from my hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. The shards and water scattered at my feet, reflecting how broken I felt inside. "Your mother?" I said slowly, the disbelief evident in my voice. "Wants to move in with us?" Scott nodded miserably. "Just until I can get back on my feet." I stared at him, my mouth open in shock. This was a nightmare. The very idea of Diane, with her constant judgment and snide remarks, living in our home made my skin crawl. "Janet, please," Scott begged. "It won't be for long. We need the help, and—" "There is no we in this decision, Scott," I cut him off, my voice cold. You and your mother don't get to decide how we handle your mistakes. I stepped over the broken glass, my anger propelling me toward the door. Clean this up, I said over my shoulder. I need some air. Janet, wait, Scott called as I grabbed my keys and reached for the doorknob. Where are you going? I paused, the weight of his question hanging in the air. I didn't turn around. To figure out how to fix the mess you've made of our lives. And with that, I walked out, the door slamming shut behind me. The next morning, I stormed into my office, my head pounding from a sleepless night. The last thing I needed was to deal with Diane's judgmental attitude on top of Scott's lies. But as if on cue, her number flashed on my phone, the screen lighting up insistently. Janet speaking, I answered stiffly, bracing myself. Janet, dear, Diane's voice dripped with false concern. I hope I'm not disturbing your very important work. I clenched my teeth. What can I do for you, Diane? I'm worried about Scott, she sighed dramatically. He's been so down lately. I can't help but wonder if your career focus might be affecting him. My grip on the phone tightened. Excuse me? Well, you know how men are, Diane continued, oblivious to the anger building in me. They need support, attention. Scott's always been sensitive. Maybe if you were home more. Diane, I cut her off, my voice low and controlled. Scott is a grown man. His job troubles are his own responsibility. But as his wife, I interrupted, my voice shaking with fury. I've been supporting us financially for years while Scott jumps from job to job. Don't you dare suggest this is my fault. Diane gasped, clearly offended. I'm only trying to help, Janet. Someone needs to be there for Scott, and if you're too busy climbing the corporate ladder... Stop right there, I snapped. My career isn't the problem. Scott's inability to keep a job is. And frankly, Diane, your constant babying isn't helping him. Well, I never, she huffed, her indignation palpable. If that's how you feel, maybe I should come stay with you for a while. Scott clearly needs support at home. A chill ran through me. That won't be necessary, I said firmly. Scott and I can manage our own problems. We'll see about that, Diane replied in a threatening tone before hanging up. I slammed the phone down, fuming. The nerve of that woman, to blame me after everything I'd done to keep us afloat. My phone buzzed with a text from Scott. Mom's worried about us. Maybe we should let her visit. I ignored it, throwing myself into my work. I spent the rest of the day drowning in spreadsheets and phone calls, anything to keep my mind off the mess at home. By the time I pulled into the driveway that evening, it was nearly 9 p.m. I froze, my stomach twisting at the sight of Diane's car parked in my usual spot. Dread settled over me as I walked inside. I found them in the kitchen, Scott nervously stirring a pot while Diane set the table. What's going on? I asked, dropping my briefcase with a loud thud. Diane turned, beaming at me. Janet, darling. We were wondering when you'd grace us with your presence. I hope you don't mind. I took the liberty of preparing dinner. You certainly took liberties, I muttered, glaring at Scott. He refused to look at me, suddenly very interested in whatever he was cooking. Scott mentioned you two were having some difficulties, Diane said, her tone dripping with concern. I thought a nice family dinner might help ease the tension. I let out a bitter laugh. A family dinner? Is that what this is? Scott finally looked up. Please, Janet. Mom's just trying to help. Help? I snapped. By ambushing me in my own home? By blaming me for your problems? Diane gasped. I would never... Save it, I cut her off. I've heard enough. You made it pretty clear how you feel about me this morning. I turned to Scott. You invited her without even asking me, didn't you? His guilty look said it all. My hands shook with anger as I grabbed my keys. Janet, wait, Scott called as I headed for the door. Where are you going? He asked, desperation in his voice. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. Somewhere I'm actually wanted, I replied coldly. Enjoy your family dinner. I slammed the door behind me, and as I walked away, I heard Diane's voice drift after me. Well, I never. Scott, darling, you really need to do something about that wife of yours. I got in my car and drove, tears blurring my vision. How had my life come to this? And more importantly, How was I going to fix it? The next day, after a long day at work, I pulled into the driveway, my stomach twisting at the sight of Diane's car still parked there. She had been here for a week now, and each day felt more unbearable than the last. Taking a deep breath, I braced myself as I went inside. The living room was a mess. Diane's belongings were scattered everywhere, suitcases overflowing with clothes, boxes stacked high, and framed pictures of her and Scott covering every surface. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice echoing through the house. Scott walked out of the kitchen looking embarrassed. "Janet, honey, I can explain." "Scott invited me to stay for a while," Diane cut in, sweeping into the room with a smug smile. "Isn't it wonderful? Now I can help around the house and give you more time to focus on your career." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Stay? For how long?" Scott shuffled his feet, avoiding my eyes. "Well, you see, Mom's having some financial problems. I thought she could live with us until she gets back on her feet." "Live with us?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Scott, we can barely support ourselves. How are we supposed to support your mother, too?" Diane clicked her tongue, her tone condescending. "Now, Janet, there's no need to be so dramatic. I'm sure if we tighten our belts, we can make it work. After all, family comes first." I spun around to face her, my hands trembling. "This isn't your decision, Diane. This is our home, mine and Scott's." "Of course, dear," she said, her voice patronizing. "But Scott agrees it's for the best, don't you, sweetheart?" Scott nodded weakly, and something inside me snapped. "How dare you?" I hissed, stepping closer to him. "How dare you make this decision without talking to me?" "This is my house too, Scott. My life." "Please, Janet," Scott begged. "Mom needs our help. We can't just turn our backs on her." "Like you turned your back on your responsibilities?" I shot back. "Or how you've turned your back on our marriage by lying to me?" Diane gasped. "Janet, that's no way to talk to your husband." I whirled around to face her. "And you? You've come waltzing in here, criticizing my choices, blaming me for Scott's failures, and now you expect me to support you?" "I'm only trying to help," Diane sniffed, her confidence cracking. "Someone needs to hold this family together." "We were doing just fine before you showed up," I snapped. Scott stepped between us, his voice trembling. "Janet, that's enough. Mom's staying, and that's final." I stared at him, disbelief and betrayal flooding through me. "Final? You don't get to make that decision on your own, Scott." "Well, someone has to make decisions around here," he shot back. "You're never home anyway." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stepped back, grabbing my purse. "I'm never home because I'm working my butt off to keep us going while you hop from one job to the next." "Janet, wait," Scott started, but I was already heading to the door. "No, Scott, I'm done waiting. I'm done being the bad guy in all of this." I paused at the door, turning back to both of them. "You want to play happy family with Mommy Dearest? Fine, but don't expect me to stick around and watch." "Where are you going?" Scott called after me. "To a hotel," I replied coldly. "Since I'm apparently no longer welcome in my own home,